When Starfield was launched, I wasn't expecting Game of the Year or Best Game in Years. But I did expect after 20 some years of development that this game was going to have a great story and concept because it needed it as a glue to hold it together. Now, why did I feel that way? Well, during a 2 decade development cycle, every popular gaming style in that period was incorporated into the game. And I mean that literally. It's a first person shooter, it's a first person space shooter. It's a survival game where you build bases. It's a crafting game where you collect resources and components to make upgrades. It's a looting game where the best items are found. It's a RPG game where choices made determine what factions you belong to or player affinities. It's an open world game where you can go any direction at any time and choose not to follow the stories or missions. It's even a puzzle game where the skill of lockpicking isn't a skill that you just get better at. When you get better at the skill, it unlocks more difficult puzzles for you to solve. So, with this big mishmash of gaming, I knew it needed a good story and concept to hold it all together. Now, this is where we get into the reason for this video, and that's to discuss game story theory and gaming concepts. Now, before we analyze the flaws of Starfield's story, we have to quickly look at the medium of interactive gaming. In this medium, game design must consider the story it's going to tell, but the story must also consider the game design that's going to tell it. It's a symbiotic relationship. Now, an example where Starfield failed this symbiotic relationship is that their story premise is about exploring the vast regions of space for undiscovered worlds, while having the game design take place on small contained maps. There are moments where the exploration and the small maps intersect, but most of the time, constantly loading small game maps really doesn't capture the vastness of galactic exploration, and the lofty star roaming story fails to capture the intimacy and struggles taking place on these small game maps. Now, all the problems with Starfield's story can't be explained this simply. We need to look at specific elements and see how Starfield failed to apply each to understand why the game failed as a whole. From the moment the game begins, the single most important element to establishing the avatar player relationship is done through purpose and relatability. These elements must be established at the beginning of the game, usually within the first 15 minutes of gameplay, known as a catalyst event. The catalyst event makes it clear the tone of the game and sets the story in motion. It's a moment that defines who the gamer is and what the gamer needs to do. A catalyst event would show significant change from before the event to after, like a death, a robbery, a wedding, or a life altering accident. Now let's set aside the catalyst moment for a second and look at purpose and relatability. We as the gamer exist in the game world. We control the main character. We are the main character. Because of this, purpose and relatability must be applied to the gamer who the designers don't know and haven't met. Now, this is very different than, say, watching a film where we observe the main character instead of becoming it. This act of observation makes the relatability of a main character more important than the character's purpose. Relatability determines whether we like a character or not, and whether we care about them or have any interest in their journey. Purpose is secondary because if we don't relate to a character, we don't care about their purpose, which is why in film, a character's purpose can be hidden or revealed over time. With a video game where we are the main character, it's the opposite. Purpose becomes the most important element, and relatability is second. Now, this has a very simple explanation. We are the main character. No one needs to convince us to care about our own journey. But what we lack is purpose. A gamer needs to know their purpose in the story and why they're playing the game. The best game stories instill a player with a clear purpose the first few minutes of gameplay. And that brings us back to the catalyst event, which is used to define player purpose. Most modern game studios realize this and begin with a catalyst event from the very start of the game. The fourth element that needs to be established at the beginning of a game story is the story world. This is the physical environment, the arrangement of characters and props, because these things define what is unique in this world. When done right, the fictional world seems whole and gives the sense that it extends beyond what we see. This isn't about high end graphics or extensive detail in games. Minecraft is a very simple block world, yet the world of Minecraft is memorable and easy to draw a player's imagination. We have all played games that look fantastic yet seem flat and derivative. It's because the game world lacks unique elements that instantly let a player know what is special about this game world. To make sense of how to apply purpose and relatability using a catalyst event while setting up a unique story world, let's look at two games, Borderlands 2 and Baldur's Gate 3. In Borderlands 2, the game starts with your avatar in a rail train where an evil corporate boss tries to kill you with robots, and a derailing train crash in the snow leaves you alone in a desolate, frozen wasteland. The catalyst event is the attack on the train and the robots trying to kill you. Your purpose is to find safety and find the person who tried to kill you. The environment contrasts futuristic machines against undeveloped natural wastelands, fully immersing the player in the extremes of both. Borderlands 2 also gives up realism for a comic book aesthetic, replacing details with stylization. In Baldur's Gate 3, the catalyst is the gamer awakes on a mind flayer ship having been affected by mind flayers. Your purpose is to both escape the ship and find other survivors. The environment contrasts magical flying ships against simple steel weapons that you fight with. Both Borderlands 2 and Baldur's Gate 3 tap into the purpose of survival and investigation. Both begin in an active catalyst situation that reinforces these purposes, and both have unique fictional worlds, using contrasting extremes to present this, like one of high tech with harsh nature, and the other one with powerful magic and simple tools. Both made the character's purpose the gamer's active goal. In contrast, let's take a look at how Starfield starts. We can establish Starfield as a game about the future, science fiction, and the undiscovered. So, the appropriate place to begin this story would be showcasing these things. Starfield starts in an elevator. An elevator so ordinary it could exist in present time. You're in a mine. A mine so ordinary it could be West Virginia. And when the player gets off the elevator, miners are using laser cutters, but they seem simple and do nothing special. There's no sign of futuristic machinery, and the digging machines encountered resemble machines that are used today. So, the whole beginning of this story starts in a location with props that if a gamer had no idea what this game was about, they could mistake this scene for modern day Earth. As a gamer, you're told by the NPC supervisor Lynn to do a little ordinary mining and then go into the shaft alone. This is your avatar's first day in the mine, so obviously the only reason you would send a newbie in alone is if this is set up for a catalyst event, which removes any element of surprise. So after laser cutting a loose wall, the player finds a rather plain looking alien artifact, aka hunk of metal, in obvious view. The gamer then breaks loose the artifact, touches it, and gets a generic cutscene of sparkly lights and swirling dots before falling unconscious. The player then wakes up on the mine surface bunker and told they are unharmed by what happened. After a bunch of dialogue, the player walks outside the bunker in a spacesuit, grabs a gun that is in plain view, and meets with the NPC Barrett. Barrett then asks what happened when the gamer touched the artifact, to which you give a generic response because, other than flashing lights and swirling dots, there was nothing special about the experience. Next, some pirates show up who are weak enough to be defeated by miners just hanging out on a landing pad doing a little repair work. After beating the pirates, Barrett gives you his ship, his robot, and tells you he does this for two reasons. So you can deliver the artifact to the Constellation Lodge and learn what touching the artifact did to you. Then he adds the generic motivation of, do it for the adventure. Let's stop here. Several events occurred. You mined, you found an artifact. You were affected by said artifact, you fought pirates, and then asked to go on an adventure. It all sounds interesting when in synopsis form. However, this isn't a synopsis. This is exactly the depth and extent presented in the actual story in Starfield. And purpose, the one element which is key to gamer engagement, doesn't exist. The player's actions are driven by the synopsis bullet points. Go mine, grab artifact, defend mine, meet Barrett. None of which gives the player any sense of purpose. Starfield's catalyst event is touching the artifact, but nothing changed. The player is told by the NPCs the gamer now has a purpose, but the gamer still has no idea who the antagonists are or what the story's struggle is. As I defined earlier, Catalyst is an event that clarifies the gamer's purpose and shows a distinct difference from before the event to after. What Bethesda does here with the artifact is equivalent to J.J. Abrams' mystery box approach to script writing. Give the audience a closed box. Don't tell them what's inside, but tell them whatever is inside is amazing, and hope the audience's interest in finding out what is inside the box is enough to keep them engaged in the story. JJ's theory is whatever the writer could think of putting in the mystery box is never as exciting as what an audience imagines could be in the box. Now, this goes contrary to hundreds of years of satisfying stories written by imaginative writers who create ideas audiences love. But for some reason, this mystery box concept has taken hold in Hollywood and has even infected games. The artifact in Starfield is Todd Howard's version of J.J. Abrams' mystery box. By the end of the game, no reason is ever given why these artifacts were created, who created them, and touching the artifact does nothing to change the player. Barrett tells you other people have touched the artifacts, but the gamer never finds out who these other people are, and they're alive and fine. The gamer eventually discovers the artifacts are pieces of a machine, and each artifact has a temple connected to it, but no reason as to why each artifact piece gets its own temple, or why the artifacts were at random locations and actually not at the temples with their names. By the end of the game, there are more questions around these artifacts than answers. So the whole speech by Barrett as to this catalyst moment saying, "You are special, and your artifact is special, and don't you want to find out why?" is nothing more than giving the player an empty mystery box. Now let's stop here. To make my point on how badly Starfield fails in its game story theory application, I'm going to use the same synopsis points that Starfield lays out. I'm going to remove the mystery box aspect and apply game story theory to those synopsis points. So we begin again at the opening elevator ride, but this time let's change it to a high-speed elevator that's going to great depths, and it comes into open spots of massive caverns and seemingly bottomless pits. The elevator shakes and sparks, showing technology struggles in this harsh environment. The gamer looks outside the window of the elevator at miners in booster packs hovering high along ravine walls, cutting minerals out. An automated drone mining machine malfunctions and hits a miner's booster pack, causing the miners to fall and disappear into the ravine depths. In what I've set up here, we have a mine unfamiliar to one we've seen on Earth. Miners using booster packs and automated mining drones add a futuristic feel. The bottomless ravines add a sense of an exotic location. And a miner having a deadly accident makes this place feel dangerous. What I was previously a boring elevator ride to an ordinary mine is now a dangerous ride to an exotic mine. It also gives the player a sense of purpose in, I better be careful down here or I could die, which is AKA survival. This setup immediately immerses the gamer into being invested into what happens next. Then, I would repeat Starfield's moment, which has the gamer pick up a laser cutter and do a little boring mining. Some simple mining is a moment of relief to learn an aspect of gameplay, which is resource collection. Then, when Supervisor Lin talks to the gamer as if this day is an average day in the mine, the player can feel confident that the supervisor isn't shaken by the mining accident, and also be concerned that having a miner die is an average day in the mine. Next, instead of sending the player alone to explore in a contrived moment of finding an artifact, have the player clear out a new section of the mine with other miners. While clearing, the player cuts a stone that causes a collapse. Rubble tumbles down on you and fellow miners who are hurt or buried and cut you off from the rest of the mine. Now the player feels somewhat responsible for causing a collapse, and it distracts the player from the real purpose they were sent back here, which is to find an alien artifact. So while the player uses their laser cutter to remove stones from atop injured miners, Supervisor Lynn radars in saying, we're trying to dig you out, but it'll take time, and you should search for an alternate exit in case there's another collapse. Exploring, you discover a new opening in the wall. You follow the passage and come upon a cavern holding the alien artifact. You cut the artifact free, but upon touching it, you get glimpses of faces not yet seen, planets not yet explored, before you're thrown back unconscious. Now let's stop here. In what I present, the player has a purpose arise out of situation. The danger of the mine was reinforced by the mine collapsing. Being sent in with a group of miners sets up the catalyst event, and helping injured miners gives the player an emotional investment into the catalyst. And finally, when the gamer touches the artifact, the vision of specific faces, artifact temples, strange planets, things that cause the gamer to wonder and create moments of realization later when the gamer actually sees these faces and finds themselves on these planets. In what I propose so far, the player has a purpose, survival, and has a catalyst event that shows the player images of people in worlds that are unlike the mine and miners they're in, but worlds they will eventually see, which adds the purpose of investigation without any dialogue telling the player they're special. Continuing with my alternate beginning, I would discard what Starfield does, which is have Barrett just land, give some boring exposition, followed by a meaningless pirate attack. What I propose is the moment the gamer becomes conscious in the surface bunker, Barrett is already there by his side. A quick conversation takes place about who Barrett is before Barrett tells the gamer, everyone who's ever touched the artifact first has died instantly, but the player lived. The player now is special by merely surviving the act of touching the artifact. They don't need to be told they're special. Barrett then informs the player that the mine camp is currently under attack by the pirates who intercepted communications that an artifact was found. The pirates are here to steal the artifact and will kill everyone to get it. Barrett says the player must escape in his spaceship Frontier and deliver the artifact to the Constellation Lodge on New Atlantis. The pirate battle becomes a gauntlet run to the starship Frontier for the player to escape before being killed. What I propose in this last section, the fight with the pirates comes with a purpose, to reach the ship and lift off without dying. Survival. Having a battle fought not to win, but just survive, lets the player know they're at the start of the game, and that they need to level up and become stronger. And this makes the story world seem like a place yet to be conquered. I used the same synopsis points in all my situations that the actual game uses. It shows that Starfield could have worked if they just would have followed basic game story theory. It also does something else Starfield fails to do. Give the player a sense of urgency to the story and to the artifacts. I played this intro of the game many times, and every time I felt no urgency to get to Constellation Lodge on New Atlantis. I first explored the surface of the planet with the mine, then I explored the planet Crete and its science lab, and then I went to New Atlantis, and I explored New Atlantis, did some shopping, ate some food, talked to people, and I always felt like delivering the artifact would happen when I wanted to get around to it. Why did it have no urgency? Well, when I left the miners, they were safe. When I landed in New Atlantis, the city was safe. No one was ever in danger or waiting for me to help them. Starfield treats the player as someone walking through the story points, which is why story missions seem to lack urgency. If Starfield designers focused on establishing a unique story world, made activities connect purpose with story, and tried to make the player feel special instead of using dialogue to tell the player they're special, Starfield could have had an immersive story from the start. time, and distance. These elements are elastic in film and television because they can be easily manipulated with editing. Editing allows directors and writers to have total control over a third storytelling element, pacing. Simply explained, a 5-minute walk may take 30 seconds because an audience is watching a well paced version of the walk. In video games, the story takes place in real time and actual distance. A 5-minute walk takes 5 minutes because the world tangibly exists. Game designers can find ways to manipulate time and distance, like running really fast, adding vehicles, or placing fast travel locations to skip distances, but these options can mess with a gamer's sense of actual distance if not properly applied, distorting the world perspective and creating uneven game pacing. Starfield struggles with time and distance. In a game that has planets, stars, and solar systems, time and distance can become overwhelming, yet the game must create some sense of long distance travel so a planet feels remote, or the player will have no sense of galactic perspective. Starfield space travel fails to capture the vastness of space. And at the same time, traveling by land seems so vast, it's unbearable. All land travel is done on foot, without vehicles. There are booster packs, but they're only good for vertical jumping. This translates into gameplay as a 5-minute walk taking longer than 5 minutes. Now, why longer than 5 minutes? Because Starfield also decided to cripple the player with constant stamina reductions and inventory weight restrictions. Now, to be fair, Starfield does have a fast travel mechanic, but only between locations the player has previously visited. And if the player loots too many items, this burden prevents the player from using fast travel. Now, I mentioned earlier that Starfield tries to be many types of games. It's a loot game, so collecting loot adds weight. It's a survival game, so collecting resources adds weight. It's a crafting game, so collecting components adds weight. It's impossible for a player to not be constantly overburdened. The game punishes a player for doing the things the game set up for the player to do, which is collect loot, collect resources, and collect components. Now let's look at this ability to fast travel on land. No in-game explanation is given for this ability. Is it some form of technology or device that you got? No. It's time-lapse, that's it. It's the designer saying, you've already done this, so you don't have to do it again. But when a player is overburdened, they're not allowed to fast travel. It's this arbitrary ability in the game to have time-lapse fast travel, and then the arbitrary rule of not being able to fast travel when overburdened that just completely undermines the game's pace. Why should anything prevent a player from fast traveling locations if fast travel is just time-lapse? This is why an in-game explanation is needed to be given for fast travel and its restrictions. The way the game handles land travel pulls the player out of game story immersion. Now, in extreme contrast, Starfield space travel is too short and oversimplified. In this case, an explanation is given for the ability to travel great distances so quickly, but the reason is so thoroughly explored in the story, the player feels robbed by its lack of presentation. Now, let me explain. If a player needs to travel many light years to another solar system, the journey should feel like it's different than flying from the Earth to the moon. The player should get a sense of that they traveled long distances, far from where they know is home. But in Starfield, it takes a single mouse click and a few seconds of loading screen animation, and voila, the player is at their destination, regardless of distance. This approach makes the entire galaxy seem small. You look at a star map, click on a white dot with a name, and next thing, your ship is there. It's as if the designers had no idea how to do space travel, so they decided to completely ignore it. This also destroys the gamer's sense of galactic location. Now let's take a moment to look at the game story's detailed explanation onto why ships can fast travel light years. It is, after all, one of the core concepts in the game's story. Gravitational drives, or what the game calls grav drives, make this interplanetary space travel possible. It should be the most developed and most special experience in the game. After all, it's the alien artifacts which allowed the invention of gravitational drives. Gravitational drives are the reason Earth is no longer habitable, and it's grav drives that allow humanity to colonize the entire galaxy in Starfield. These facts are in the game's story. A player should experience being inside a ship while fast traveling faster than the speed of light, looking out the window while stars blur past. And the time spent in gravitational drive travel would give a sense of distance and create a pattern for space traveling while providing the game with better pacing. And yet, not a single moment of gameplay is spent experiencing gravitational drive space travel in the first person. The game story theory question Starfield didn't consider is, how does the game maintain a realistic sense of time and distance while properly managing in game world and story pacing? Starfield's answer was to remove all space travel and replace it with loading screens while having players walk around on the ground like cavemen in a science fiction game. Let's talk about relationships. Relationships with NPCs increase gamer engagement outside of combat. It influences an emotional reaction if something happens to that NPC, and it affects the player's in game decisions when companion with a character. Now, in our actual lives, we know which relationships are most important to us. We also know what events are of great importance too, like a marriage or death of a loved one, winning an award, or even celebrating a birthday. In these important life moments, we want to include those people that matter to us. It's the same in gaming, but gaming relationships are unlike any other visual medium. In film and television, we create our feelings on characters based on what we observe or are told. An audience doesn't get to decide which characters they want to spend time with or avoid those they don't. But in a video game, we're participants. One player can choose to ally with a character while another gamer may choose to oppose them. This relationship flexibility allows for more personal gameplay. But for game relationships to have meaning, it's important characters have a substantial connection to the story and not just exist in the game world. Now, this isn't just done by including a character in some side storyline or giving them expository dialogue. A character's connection to a story should be presented in a way that the gamer could imagine the character pursuing the story as a participant. And the character's connection to the story should be personal, about being wronged or wanting to make something right, about a threat to their life or livelihood or family. This gives the gamer an opportunity to empathize with a character while at the same time giving the gamer an entry point into having a relationship with the character. Now, this is where identifying important story moments comes into play. It isn't enough to have a character be friendly or have backstory. Game developers must identify what story points are important to the gamer, what story points are important to the character, and where these story points intersect. Let me refer to one of my earlier examples, Baldur's Gate 3. In Baldur's Gate, you acquire companions to join you as party members in your journey. And as you encounter each, you discover that they suffer from the same affliction that you do. You are infected by mind flayers. You are all aboard the ship at the same time. Then the game aligns your purpose with these characters' purpose of finding a cure. This common goal allows you to relate to the character as a victim, like yourself, and therefore unite into a party. But the game goes further. It gives each their own individual connection to the story. Each has a location or a destination they seek where they have alliances. Each has an antagonistic relationship with a different aspect of the main story. And finally, these NPCs express a conviction to pursue their own goals with or without the gamer's participation. It's this individuality of character that gives the gamer a chance to view these characters as beings. It doesn't have to be a positive relationship. It's possible the more a gamer learns about a character, the less they like that character. But what is important is the gamer has personal feelings regarding a character. This arises out of a character being engaged in their own story. See, in real life, we're not only choosing people who we want to include into our lives, we're also choosing whose lives we want to get involved in. When a character is convicted to their own lives, it allows us to decide if we want to be a part of this character's life. When a character has no story connection and no conviction to their own lives, but exposits dialogue about mission information or story facts, these are what I call signpost characters. This refers back to the early days of gaming when instructions for gamers was placed in NPC dialogue instead of displayed in text, like a signpost verbally giving directions. Starfield characters, despite all their dialogue options and backstories, basically explain what has just happened or what the gamer should do next, like a signpost. Starfield characters are not actively involved in pursuing any goal associated with the main story. Let's take Sarah from Constellation. When you first meet Sarah at the lodge, she tells you how collecting these artifacts is the primary mission of Constellation. However, she doesn't tell you about the mission she took to acquire the first two artifacts because Constellation got them from people who already found them. Sarah then tells you about a character named Mora who has another alien artifact and knows the soldier who has the information on how to find Mora. Yet Sarah has no urgency to pursue this artifact on her own. She's willing to sit around Constellation Lodge and wait for the gamer to do it. This is a signpost character. Now, I know it's not uncommon for NPCs to wait for gamers to join them on missions, but they usually have a reason, like if the character is transporting the gamer to another location, or the character is going into the battle and needs assistance from the gamer, or maybe the gamer has information the character needs to complete a mission. Or maybe the mission is the gamer's mission and the character just wants to tag along. In all these cases, the gamer is the lead. But none of these are the case with Sarah. Sarah already has two artifacts and knows more about the artifacts than the gamer does. She knows who has the next artifact and is friends with the contact on how to find it. The gamer adds no skills or weapons that Sarah needs. The only reason she waits for the player is because the player now controls the Frontier, which is Constellation's only ship, and that just doesn't make any sense. Constellation is wealthy enough to own a building in New Atlantis. One of its members, Walter, sitting right next to her in the lodge, owns a shipbuilding company, Stroud Eklund. And the purpose of Constellation is space exploration. So the only reason Constellation has one ship is to explain why signpost characters sit at the lodge waiting for the gamer. This artifact mission should have been Sarah's mission. Getting the third artifact is her goal, not the player's. Finding the artifact should become the player's mission through joining Constellation characters on their artifact missions. This first mission, the gamer should be a companion to Sarah, not the reverse. Then the player could have seen what type of person Sarah was, what kind of leader based on her choices. And when the mission goal was achieved, Sarah could express trust for the gamer because they experienced this hardship together. And because the player would see Sarah make a decision, the gamer would know whether they wanted Sarah as a companion or not. This illusion that Sarah would have pursued this mission without the player makes Sarah's investment in the story feel real. Let's look at another character, the mine supervisor Lynn, the first character you meet in the game. The slow elevator ride, nor the mining activities create any kind of relationship experience. Fighting with the pirates on the landing platform is too brief, and it includes so many unnamed NPCs, it fails to create any kind of bond with Lynn. Yet, later in the game, she'll offer to join the character's crew, but why? She has no reason to trust the player with her life, and no direct or even indirect connection to the game's story. She's just waiting at the mine for the player to ask her to join. How about Barrett? He has a kind personality. He tries to act like he cares about the gamer even though no previous connection has been established. We stated earlier in this video, if the gamer was the only person to survive touching the artifact, It would have made sense if Barrett immediately realized the gamer was special, but everyone survives touching an artifact, so the artifact should have been more important to Barrett than the gamer at this time. Barrett's first priority should have been ensuring the delivery of the artifact to Constellation, not protecting the mine. He should have accompanied the gamer to the lodge, then immediately returned to protect the mine, leaving the player behind. Delivering the artifact would have shown Barrett as a leader and a committed member of Constellation, and leaving to go back to the mine to help the miners would have shown Barrett has his own story beyond the player. Even the Constellation group is a signpost. Constellation is about the pursuit of knowledge and exploration, which is a real generic philosophy. In Starfield, every other faction tied itself to an ideology, from commerce to governance, mercenary or religion. Ideology allows people from different backgrounds to come together under a common belief. These ideologies also allow for conflict, meaning other ideologies may oppose it. Every faction in this game wishes to acquire more knowledge, so the pursuit of knowledge and exploration is what every faction in this game is doing. Only Constellation lacks ideology about how to pursue knowledge and explore. And it's Constellation's lack of ideology that should lead to tremendous conflict between its members, which could have been interesting if the player's influence on Constellation maybe determined what kind of ideology would take control in Constellation. But it doesn't. Sarah even states Constellation doesn't get involved in player choices, whether they're good or evil. But let's jump ahead to the next story progression, where the gamer encounters two primary Starborn characters, the Hunter and the Emissary. It's the ideology that separates these two beings, and which ideology a gamer supports determines which Starborn character the gamer will build an antagonistic or protagonistic relationship with. This is the acknowledgement from the game that ideology is what drives the core story. So by giving Constellation no ideology, the game is saying Constellation has no effect on the story world, or the story outcome. Constellation just exists, which makes it irrelevant and uninteresting. And the strangest part is the game designers game characters associated with Constellation an affinity mechanic. Now, this mechanic determines if a character approves or disapproves of a player's actions. But these characters also agreed to be members of Constellation, knowing Constellation does not judge the actions of other members, so they shouldn't be judging the player. So how does all this tie into character relationships? When you have signpost characters who aren't actively involved in storylines of their own, and the characters don't do anything to define their own ideology, it becomes difficult to establish a relationship with these characters. Then the characters are connected by this group called Constellation, which has no ideology and says it doesn't care to judge its members. Now mix in the strange design decision of character affinity, where these undefined characters belonging to this undefined group judge a player's actions. This makes the characters of Constellation seem like liars, because they explicitly said they don't judge the player's choices. This actually creates anger and annoyance between the gamer and the characters instead of a bond. And then when you top this off with the fact that this annoying affinity mechanic means nothing. No matter how a player angers or befriends a character or even attempts to kill it, it's irrelevant, since the only way a player can go through this storyline is with these signpost characters directing them, which means the signpost must give you information to keep the story going. So why even add an affinity mechanic? The game would have been funner and funnier if the player, no matter what the player did, Constellation characters complimented the player. That would have stuck the principles of Constellation and made the NPCs not so annoying, and even got rid of the useless game mechanic affinity. And that takes us to the next game story theory element, which is identifying the important moments in a story. There are powerful pivotal moments that put context and meaning to characters within the story. The outcome of these moments should have an impact and expose the strength of relationships between gamer and character. An example would be a gamer fighting a boss enemy to near death but then having to let that boss escape to save a dying companion. These are bittersweet moments of both victory and defeat, but most importantly, if done properly, the feeling of victory or defeat should be tied to the outcome of what happens to a companion they formed a relationship with and not the mission outcome. Destroying an enemy but losing a companion should feel like a loss. And letting an enemy escape but rescuing a companion should feel like a victory. Having important events and dramatic relationship moments occur simultaneously creates a heightened experience that is greater than if done separately. Now, if relationships were improperly constructed, these moments actually can create counterintuitive responses. If a player doesn't care about a character, having to let an enemy escape to save an annoying companion feels like a lose lose. And killing an enemy while having an annoying companion die can feel like a win win. And that takes us to one of the most dramatic relationship situations, which is the death of a character. Therefore, it is vital death moments take place where the stakes of the story are so high that a death feels like a conceivable outcome. And the character death should not take place off screen. Having an off screen death always creates an unclimactic feeling, a detachment to death and the character. It's as if the game is telling you that the character wasn't worth the time to spend a final moment with. The only time not showing a main character's death is acceptable is if the goal of the story is investigating their death, like a crime or a mystery. Then seeing the character die is replaced by the gamer reconstructing the death in detail and usually learning more about the character by interviewing other characters. So game designers should always ask these questions before killing off a character who a player has a relationship with. Was the relationship important to the gamer? Was the death important to the story? And is holding someone accountable for the character's death important? If the answer to any of these is yes, then the gamer should see the death and experience it with the character during an important story moment. Now, two games which have dramatic death scenes of characters are Borderlands 2 and Cyberpunk 2077. In Borderlands 2, the player runs through a bombed out battlefield, climbs a bunker to fight a boss, then infiltrates an inner data core to fight side by side ally and friend Roland, to free a captive siren, only to end with Roland's death at the hands of the villain, Handsome Jack. In Cyberpunk 2077, it has a covert theft mission with your partner in crime, Jackie. The player and Jackie infiltrate the Osaka Corporation, use an elite military robot for espionage. The mission goes awry as both barely escape. They fall stories off the edge of a building, survive, and run a bullet gauntlet that ends with Jackie bleeding out in the getaway car. In these two games, the player is on a mission with the character, working through difficult circumstances towards a goal and helping each other succeed at the task at hand. And in both, their deaths took a moment where the player had a feeling of victory and success and were instantly challenged with sadness, sorrow, and loss. And these deaths were placed in important story moments that changed the direction of the story. Both deaths felt glorious and earned, and the player saw the character die a hero's death. That is how a player accepts these deaths and feels good about them. We get to see these characters at their best as equals to us, giving us a proud memory, glad to have shared this moment with them, and sad we're not going to have any more. Now let's take a look at how Starfield handles the death of a significant character. First, let's consider who Starfield has die. Actually, they don't. The character that dies is the character in which the gamer has the highest affinity with, not at the location you choose to defend. This decision is basically one line of code. And because it's flexible, it's impossible to make the death meaningful. If any constellation companion can randomly die by weight of affinity, every character eligible for this affinity death can't be involved in the story. And their death can't have an effect on the story outcome, which means none of the possible companions eligible for this random death were important to the game's story. Now think about that. Not a single constellation companion character will be involved in the game's story. Now, Starfield tries to hide that fact by putting the face of the dead character on the Starborn emissary character, But it has no meaning because the emissary is not the character that died and the one you spent time with. It's just deception and attempt to make the player feel for the emissary in the same way they feel about the character that died. But since the character that died was just a signpost, the face on the emissary is just putting a flyer on a wall. So we discussed who dies. Now let's take a look at how they'll die in Starfield. Starfield chooses the moment when you have gathered with all members of the constellation either at the space station or at the lodge in New Atlantis. Now, in my first playthrough, I was at the lodge with, I think, Barrett, Vasco, Mateo, Walter, and Noel. And at the same moment, Sarah, Andrea, Sam, and Vladimir are in orbit at the space station. Now, who's at which location changes with each player and the infinities they built, so don't be surprised if the arrangement was different for you. I only mention which characters were where because I'm explaining what happened as I played. Now, word comes in that the space station had just been attacked by the Starborn Hunter, and Constellation members there are near death. The Hunter is also on his way to the lodge to take back the alien artifacts into his possession. I am then presented with a choice: go to the space station and save lives of Constellation members there, or stay at the lodge to protect the artifacts from being taken. Now, this was a rather easy decision for me as a gamer. I thought the game wouldn't have the enemy take the artifacts from me without giving me a chance to get them back, and I was married to Sarah, who was on the space station, so my choice was, do I go and save my wife and spend this important story moment with her, or do I take a chance and let my wife die to protect an alien object I have no relationship with? So I chose Sarah over the objects. I had hoped the game was finally giving me a true gameplay choice moment. One choice, the gamer would be involved in a heroic space battle to save friends, and choosing that would affect the remaining storyline. The other choice, the player staying at the lodge to fight a grueling defensive battle protecting the artifacts, shows the player choosing knowledge over relationships, and the remaining storyline would follow that. So I felt like this moment was the end of Act 2, beginning of Act 3, where I believed this choice would be essential in how the remaining storyline played out. I rocketed to the space station, docked, and it was rather uneventful. I made it in time to save Sarah, but then I went back to the lodge. So I was already wondering if I made the wrong choice because they didn't seem like there was a story event at the station. So arriving back at the lodge, a battle had already taken place. I was found Barrett dead, killed by the Hunter. I was also told that Noel escaped with the artifacts and is being pursued by the Hunter. So that's it. A dead Barrett and no event. And he was killed off screen. The story doesn't even treat his death like one of great loss because the signpost characters there are telling me to hurry after Noel, trying to get me out of there as soon as possible. So, rushing to the quarters under the lodge, I find Noel standing in what I best describe as a sewer. Now, I did make a joke to myself that I hope this isn't because the game designers knew this story is crap and the sewer is where it belonged. The Hunter appeared, and I pulled out my minigun, and I quickly tear through the fake holographic Hunter, while Noel escapes to my ship on the launch pad. Finally, the real Hunter appears, and I battle with the real Hunter, but I injure him to half health before he becomes invincible, because the game isn't going to let me kill the Hunter. The Hunter is just another signpost pointing me to my next destination, my ship on the launch pad. So I chase after Noel, knowing each time a Hunter appears, it's a fake clone that really don't have to kill, and all I have to do is get past it. Soon, I'm safely on the ship, and I'm given the option to keep the artifacts on my ship or set them up on one of my planet stations which I built. This climactic event, where a character was killed, only served one purpose: to move the artifacts from the lodge to the player's possession. That's it. The death of Barrett, that happened off screen. The combat with the Hunter was just a sparring session. There isn't a single moment in that entire scenario where my actions determine the outcome. Now, on another playthrough, I stayed at the lodge to defend the artifact, and the character placement was slightly different. I had a fight with the Hunter inside the lodge and its fake clone while Noel escaped with the artifacts. Then, when the game told me to go run for my ship, I did. Once inside my ship, I went to the I space station and found Sarah dead. This playthrough choice seemed even less eventful than my first playthrough, probably because I knew there were no stakes in my choices. So Starfield failed to create engaging characters, character relationships, and minimized important story moments and even a character's death. But hey, all is not lost. Maybe Bethesda hit it out of the park with the last story concept we will discuss. Bethesda, if you couldn't sell hope, how would you make money? Story concept. It's what the actual gaming experience revolves around. The concept determines the type of story being told and what will become of the story world. The concept is more important to a game than the story because it represents the game as an IP and as a franchise and determines which consumers will purchase the game in advance, sight unseen. To formulate a good gaming concept, it must be concise in meaning, palpable or able to be interacted with, and finite in scope. Now, a concept used by many fictional stories in modern time and used by Starfield is the use of the multiverse. Now, the actual scientific concept around multiverses refers to unlimited universes in existence, universes that may be nothing like ours at all, universes where the Earth doesn't exist or where life never grew on Earth, universes where humanity is never born, and universes where you, as the viewer of this video, never came to be. Since these variations are infinite, the existence of any one of us in the multiverse is even more rare than us in our own universe, meaning throughout the multiverse, you are even more unique than you are in this one. However, Starfield takes the sophomoric approach to multiverses, stating that every multiverse has the same people, same factions, same planets, though they may vary slightly. Starfield also does not know what a universe is. Since this game takes place on a star map of solar systems that exist within a single galaxy and not an entire universe. I pointed out in the last section of this video how Starfield fails to create relationships between characters and gamers. After reaching the unity, which is the name Starfield gives to the center of all its universes, you see another reason why they do this. You see, once you reach the unity, you become starborn, and then you're sent to restart in another universe. That next universe may have all the constellation members be the same. All the constellation members might be dead. One version, the members are replaced by children, and another, all the members are actually avatars of you, the player. If every constellation character can be replaced, then these characters are not relevant to the story. But the Lodge exists in every universe, so does New Atlantis, the same company, same factions, and all the planet names are still the same. That's a Starfield multiverse. Everything is the same except for a few meaningless characters are different. In one multiverse version, the player encounters Sarah as a houseplant. Well, not really, but for a time, the player thinks Sarah is a houseplant. And that says everything about Starfield. You can replace the characters with houseplants, and the gamer won't know the difference. So, what is actually important across all these universes in the game that keeps a gamer playing? What ties all these universes together if it's not character relationships? It's the alien artifacts. The Todd Howard mystery box, which has no purpose other than collecting to level up. So, why does the game have the player engage in ideological conversations with Starborn Hunter or the emissary on their philosophies and which is more important to the unity? I don't know. And I honestly mean that. I don't know. These artifacts don't have a philosophy and don't care who wields them. They just are. The player can be good or bad through all the universes, and it has no effect on the objects or collecting them. The core concept of the entire game is a multiverse that centers around inanimate artifacts to reach a unity at the center of everything that does not care who reaches it. If that's the game concept, then what should a player feel at that final moment of reaching the unity? The answer is nothing. The player didn't save the universe, destroy the universe. The player didn't change the universe for better or worse. The player just finishes the mission at the center of everything. None of the universes are important, none of the NPCs are important, and the player doesn't become invested in any one universe. But the thing is, it wasn't a multiverse concept that made Starfield fail. It was their lack of understanding of their own concept. You see, Starfield talks about this game world as a multiverse, but what Starfield actually created in the game was multiple timelines of the same single galaxy. If they made that the game concept, they might have had a chance for success. Let me explain. The player on the first playthrough collects all the artifacts, assembles them, which builds a device allowing them to reach the unity at the center of all universes, and then become one with the universe. Start over again, reaching a variation of the lodge before the artifacts were collected. Now let me repeat that. You're sent back in time before the artifacts were collected. This is known as a time loop, not a multiverse. Starfield created a single galaxy with multiple timelines. Look at the device the player builds to reach the unity. The idea of building a time machine to travel time has been well explored in fiction and understood by general audiences. Building a time machine is an in-sequence process where a person is incapable of traveling time, they build a machine, and then they can travel time. It makes sense. But Starfield's multiverse concept is out of sequence. Humans assemble an already existing machine to reach the center of all universes, but humans are not trying to travel to different universes in this game. They do not seek this knowledge and do not build the machines that make this possible. No wisdom or skill is necessary to operate these artifacts, and the artifacts assemble themselves. Finding the artifacts is as easy as looking. That's why it's out of sequence. The game concept makes the player's purpose collecting the artifacts before giving the player any reason to collect them. The game's purpose should be a quest to reach the center of the universe, then seeking the artifacts to do this, not the reverse. So who built the alien artifacts? Where did they go? And why did they build them? Why do these machine parts exist in every version of the multiverse? This question is solved in time travel because a future version of ourselves can build a time machine and send it back in time to ourselves. But using a multiverse concept, someone at the center of the universe had to create a machine and send it back in time in pieces to every universe in the multiverse to be assembled at the exact same period in time by humans who had no idea what they were looking for. To prove further Starfield was actually making a time travel game and not a multiverse game, the game designers included time manipulation in the game itself as a mechanic. The game has a chemical concoction that slows time called Aurora. The Starborn have an ability that can slow time. These mechanics imply that time is something the player can control and incorporates time manipulation into the gameplay that is tangible to the player. When a player reaches the Unity, they're sent back in time to the lodge before the artifacts were collected. All Starfield had to do is change the multiverse to time travel, and the concept of time travel would have appeared in all aspects of the game: gameplay, story, and game replay. Finally, it would explain why every version of the universe was just a slight variation of the last playthrough, with many of the same characters. Because it isn't another universe. It's just a different timeline in the same which we, the player, exist in. Did the game designers actually incorporate any multiverse concepts into gameplay? The only direct interaction a player has is with this mission where a player sees the game location two different ways, swapping between small locations that no player would think was a different universe without being told. There is also a final Starborn battle where the fight jumps through universes, but every location jumped is one the player already explored on the current game map. So it feels like the player's teleporting around the current game map and not shifting universes. And because this game takes place in a single galaxy, the player never even sees a second galaxy in their own universe, meaning the game never establishes what it is like to travel within one universe. I'm sure when they started this project 27 years ago, multiverse was not the core concept. This presentation of multiverse is so shallow it resembles the modern Hollywood multiverse movies. So I'm guessing this multiverse aspect was added in the last 5 to 10 years of development, which is why the multiverse concept exists only in exposition and not really in gameplay. When a player reaches the Unity, they realize they could have finished this game story without ever mining a resource, without ever building a land base, without ever modifying their ships, showing half of the game mechanics incorporated into this game were not part of the story. No game would add all those game styles to an existing story because it costs too much time and manpower and money. But they would slap a story on top of a game that already had these game mechanics built in. The final question I pose to Starfield is, what is it to become Starborn? When a player reaches the Unity, they can become Starborn, but what's so special about that? The Emissary and the Hunter have reached the Unity to become Starborn, but so have their nameless henchmen who you kill in landing parties and at temples or destroy their ships in space. Reaching the Unity must happen all the time. And if the gamer can kill numerous Starborn as a mere human, what makes being Starborn better? Why become Starborn? The Starborn concept is unmemorable. And the collection of these artifacts isn't connected to the game climax. It's connected to the game conclusion. You see, this final Starborn boss battle is nothing more than another moment for the player to collect more artifacts. And being Starborn as part of the game's conclusion only means the player gets to start over. Think about that. After reaching the center of all existence, you are reborn as Starborn. Yet you're still flying around between planets and walking on the ground as you did when you were human, collecting more artifacts. The conclusion of Starfield is like a tragic contest in hell. The contest is, if you work really hard and complete your tasks, your reward is another days of hard work. And if you work really hard and complete your tasks, your reward is another day of hard work, until you eventually realize there is no reward. It's just a job you were tricked into thinking there's a reward for working hard every day. But Bethesda did create 1,000 procedurally generated boring planets. That's cool, right? Listen, Starfield's concept was never properly enacted or developed. Their character relationships were never properly constructed or integrated. Important story moments were never given special consideration or treatment. And all the different gameplay styles, from first-person shooter to survival to crafting, were never unified in a single story concept. It feels like a game that was developed for over 2 decades. It has so many different things added, yet does not have a solid game concept or story core. But the truth is, if the game did have a solid story and concept, the game would have been completed a decade ago. Look, I gotta admit, I'm saddened by the result of Microsoft's long-term efforts and Bethesda's influence on Starfield, yet I can't say the outcome wasn't expected. Just like in Starfield, where every universe is just a replication of the same empty, lifeless galaxy with a few character changes, so is Bethesda's game output. And all Bethesda had to do to make this game successful was use game story theory and apply it to Starfield. All right, strap in, Bosco. We're out of here. We have to go to Jarvis.